A hand closed on my left shoulder and pulled, and for the first time in 11 years on the gate, I felt a stranger try to move me like furniture. I want you to understand what that hand was. It was not a slap. It was not a fist. A slap I had taken before in my early years from a drunk who wanted a video. A fist I had blocked once with the flat of my forearm and nothing else. This was different and, in its way, worse. This was a man who had decided I was a prop in his own production, an object set slightly wrong on a stage he believed was his, and who reached out to slide me 3 feet to the left because the morning light fell better there. His name, I learned afterward, was Monsieur Vale, chief of protocol for the visiting delegation of the Serene Republic, and he had crossed the whole length of the arrival court to put that hand on me. I did not know any of that in the moment. In the moment I knew only the weight of his fingers digging through the red wool at my shoulder seam, the smell of his cologne arriving a half-second before he did, and his voice, low and impatient, saying the thing I have never forgotten. "Move, you are spoiling the shot." I did not move. I want to be plain about that from the start, because everything that came after, the silence that fell over 200 dignitaries, the way the cameras swung from the empty red carpet to the one still figure at the edge of it, the charge that ended a career built over 30 years, all of it grew from the simple fact that I did not move 1 inch when a powerful man with cologne and a clipboard decided that I should. Let me set the morning for you, because the morning matters. The House of Caldrith was receiving a state visit, the first in 9 years from the Serene Republic, and the whole forecourt had been dressed for it since before dawn. I had come on at 5 in the gray, when the carpet was still being unrolled and the brass stanchions were being set, and the long red runner was being walked twice by men with lint rollers on poles. By 8 the court was a different country. Banners of both houses hung from the gilded railings, ours in deep crimson, theirs in the pale silver gray they favored, and the morning sun had climbed high enough to lay a clean wash of light across the pale stone and turn the dew on the cobbles to 1,000 small fires. My post was the arrival stone, a worn flat block of granite set into the cobbles at the foot of the great south steps, where guards of the house had stood to receive arriving sovereigns for 240 years. It is not a decorative post. It is the oldest standing post in the forecourt, and the man who holds it on a state day is the still point the whole ceremony turns around. The carpet runs past my left boot. The dignitaries form up to my right. When the doors of the arriving carriage open, the first thing a visiting head of state sees of our house is the arrival stone and the man standing on it. And the man standing on it does not move, does not speak, and does not so much as turn his eyes, because his stillness is the house saying, without a word, "You are received, and you are received by something older than any of us." I had stood it 40 times. I knew its weight. I knew that on a state day you become less a man and more a fixed point, and that the whole choreography of greeters and pages and band and carriage is built around the certainty that you will be exactly where you are supposed to be, to the inch, when the moment comes. The carpet was measured to my boot. The first salute was timed to my eyeline. I was, that morning, a load-bearing wall in a building made of protocol, and a load-bearing wall does not slide left for the light. The Serene party had arrived early to set their own arrangements, which is normal, and they had brought their own people, which is also normal. What was not normal was their chief of protocol. I had been watching him for an hour before he touched me, watching the way a still man watches, without turning his head, taking in the court through the wide, soft edges of his vision. He was a tall man in a beautifully cut gray morning coat, a silver lanyard at his throat, a slim leather folio under one arm, and a manner that announced before he said a word that he was used to a room rearranging itself when he walked into it. He moved through the forecourt the way a director moves through a set. He had 2 pages trotting after him. He pointed at a stanchion and it was moved. He pointed at a banner and a man went up a ladder. He stopped one of our own footmen and turned him a quarter turn by the elbow so the man's livery caught the light, and the footman, bless him, let himself be turned, because a footman can be turned and it costs the house nothing. I watched him work his way down the line of the carpet, and I felt, the way you feel weather coming, that he was working his way toward me. He stopped 20 feet off and looked at me for a long moment with his head tilted, the way a man looks at a painting that is hanging slightly crooked. He raised his folio and made a note. He said something to a page, and the page glanced at me and then very carefully did not glance at me again, which told me the page had more sense than his master. And then the chief of protocol came across the carpet, across it, stepping on the measured red runner in his polished shoes, which our own people would no more do than walk across an altar, and he reached out and put his hand on my shoulder and pulled. "Move, you are spoiling the shot." Here is what was happening behind my face, since I am the only one who can tell you. I felt the pull, and I felt my own weight settle, the way it settles when a man on a ladder tests a rung, not a brace, not a flinch, just the body remembering that it has decided where it stands. I felt the seam of my tunic strain at the shoulder. I felt his second tug, harder, a little incredulous now, the tug of a man who is genuinely surprised that the prop will not slide. And I felt, rising under all of it, the old cold clarity that the post puts into you, the thing they cannot teach and can only wear into you over years, that the more a man pushes, the more important it becomes that you do not give him the inch. So I gave him nothing, not a turn of the head, not a word, not a tightening of the jaw he could have photographed. I stood on the arrival stone where 240 years of my predecessors had stood, and I let his hand find out, all on its own, that it had closed on something that was not going to move. What I could not yet see, what I would only piece together later from the footage and the testimony and the long, quiet conversations in the days after, was that 3 things were already in motion that morning, and that the chief of protocol, in his certainty that the world rearranged itself for him, had just walked into all 3 at once. The first thing was the cameras. I will come to the others, but the cameras were the irony of the whole affair, and a man should appreciate an irony when it costs him everything. The chief of protocol's entire purpose that morning, his sacred and self-appointed mission, was the optics, the arrival shot. The single frame that would run on every front page and every screen in 2 republics, the visiting head of state stepping down from the carriage, the carpet, the banners, the bright stone, the house of Caldrith receiving its guest in full ceremony. He had spent an hour arranging that frame the way a jeweler arranges stones. He had moved stanchions and footmen and banners for it. And he had decided that the one element ruining his composition was the still soldier on the granite block, that my dark bearskin against the bright south steps was a smudge in his perfect picture, an obstruction between his lens and his light. So he reached out to fix the optics with his hands. And every camera in that forecourt, ours, theirs, the press pools, the long lenses up on the gallery, the dozens of phones held over the velvet ropes by the invited public, every one of them was already running, already pointed at the carpet and the steps and the still soldier, because the carriage was due in 11 minutes and no one wanted to miss the first frame. He had built a stage saturated with lenses, and then he had walked onto it and committed the one act that stage was incapable of hiding. But I get ahead of myself. In the moment, I did not think of cameras. In the moment, there was only the second pull. The first pull had been a test, a brisk, business-like tug, the tug of a man clearing an obstruction, fully expecting the obstruction to clear. When it did not, something changed in him. I felt it through his hand before I heard it in his voice. The hand tightened, the fingers dug, and the second pull was not businesslike at all. It was personal. It had heat in it. He had asked the world to rearrange itself as it always did, and the world had refused, and a man like that does not meet refusal calmly. He met it the way such men always do, by pushing harder. "Are you deaf?" His voice had dropped to a hiss, pitched for me alone, the public voice gone. 2 steps. There, you are in my frame. Move or I will have you moved. I will tell you the truth of what restraint costs, because the niche of stillness is badly understood by people who have never had to hold it. Restraint is not the absence of feeling. Restraint is feeling everything and spending it all on one task, not moving. When his fingers dug into my shoulder the second time, I felt the whole animal length of me want to turn and set him back on his heels, not out of anger exactly, but out of the simple physical insult of being handled. 11 years on the gate does not make you a statue. It makes you a man who has built, day by cold day, a wall between what he feels and what he does, and learned to stand behind it. The wall held. It always held. But do not imagine it was empty behind that wall. Behind that wall I was very awake. I gave him my eyes for exactly 1 second. I want to be careful about this, because it is the only thing I did, and small things matter when a man is later asked under oath what he did. I did not turn my head. I did not speak. I shifted my gaze, only for a heartbeat from the middle distance over his shoulder to his own face, 8 inches from mine. I let him see in that 1 second that there was a man behind the bearskin, awake and unafraid and entirely unmoving, and that the man had measured him and found him wanting. Then I returned my eyes to the middle distance, where they belonged, and gave him nothing more. I have been told since that the look traveled, that a long lens up on the gallery caught it, and that it became, in the days after, a kind of small famous thing. The 1 second the still guard looked at the man pulling on him, and the man flinched. I did not know that then. I only knew that he let go of my shoulder as if it had grown hot, and stepped back half a pace, and that his face had gone a color that did not photograph well. He should have stopped there. A wiser man would have. A man with any instinct for the ground shifting under him would have straightened his coat, smoothed his folio, and walked away to find some other element of his frame to torture. The thing about men who have spent 30 years having the world rearrange itself is that they have never once had to read a room that was turning against them, because rooms had never turned against them before, and so they have no skill at it at all. He could not feel what I could feel, and what I could feel, standing dead still in the middle of it, was the entire forecourt going quiet. That was the second thing in motion. A state arrival forecourt is not silent. It hums. There is the band tuning under the colonnade, the murmur of 200 dignitaries, the snap and rustle of banners, the soft-barked coordinates of the protocol staff, the shudder chatter of the press. I had stood in that hum 40 times and knew its texture the way a sailor knows the sea. And in the 30 seconds since the chief of protocol had first laid his hand on me, the hum had been changing. Conversations had stopped, one cluster at a time as people turned. The protocol staff had gone still. Even the band had faltered, a clarinet had trailed off mid-phrase. The forecourt was doing the thing a crowd does when it senses that something is happening which is not supposed to happen. It was holding its breath and watching. He did not feel it. He squared his folio against his chest, and his voice came back up into the public register, louder now, deliberately loud, a man performing his authority for an audience he had badly misjudged. He pointed his folio at me like a baton. I am the chief of protocol of the ceremonial delegation. This arrival is my responsibility. You are standing in the principal sightline and you will stand it elsewhere. Now, and then, because the world had still not rearranged itself, and because he could not conceive of a world that would not, he stepped back in, set both hands flat against my chest above the metal ribbons and shoved. A shove is a strange thing to receive when you have decided not to be moved. It is almost a comfort. A pull works on the seam of your tunic and the joint of your shoulder. It makes a man feel handled. But a shove works against your whole base, and the body answers a shove without any need of the mind. I dropped my weight into the soles of my boots, into the granite of the arrival stone, into 240 years of men who had stood exactly there, and I let him push against all of it. His hands hit my chest, the ribbons pressed flat, my heels did not lift. For a moment we stood locked, his whole weight forward, his face going from anger to confusion to something close to alarm as he understood that he had thrown himself against a wall, and the wall had simply stood there and let him bounce. And in the silent forecourt, into the held breath of 200 people, a single voice rang out, calm, carrying, and very cold. "Take your hands off my guard." That was the third thing in motion, and his name was Sergeant Aldous Quill. I should tell you about Quill because he is half of how this ended, and because he is the kind of man the public never sees and the house could not run without. Quill had been 31 years in the house guard and was the senior sergeant of the gate. He was not a large man. He was a square, gray, unhurried man with a voice he almost never raised and never needed to. And the thing about Quill was that when he spoke, the whole machinery of the gate moved, because every man on it had learned that Quill did not speak until the moment had come. He had been standing under the colonnade at the edge of the carpet, where the duty sergeant always stands on a state day, and he had watched the whole thing unfold the way I could not, from the outside, with the cameras and the crowd and the dignitaries all in his frame. He came across the carpet now. Not fast. Quill never went fast. Speed is for men who have lost control of the timing, and Quill never lost control of anything. He came across the red runner with his pace stick under his arm and his boots ringing on the stone, and the forecourt parted for him without his asking, and he placed himself square between the chief of protocol and me, close enough that the man had to step back to keep from touching him too. "You have laid hands twice on a sentry of the house, in the execution of his duty before the assembled court," Quill said, in that low, carrying voice. "You will step behind the rope and you will not approach this post again." I have replayed the next few seconds many times, because they are the hinge of the whole story, and because they are a perfect specimen of a certain kind of man being given one last door out and walking past it. The chief of protocol could have stopped. He could have taken Quill's offered rope, step back, stand down, let the morning roll on, and the whole thing would have been a small awkwardness, a footnote, a thing the House would quietly never mention to the delegation, because the delegation were guests and guests are forgiven much. No charge would have followed. No career would have ended. He had, in Quill's level voice, a clean exit handed to him on a silver tray. But he had spent 30 years not stepping back, and he did not know how to start. And worse, far worse for him, there was now an audience, and an audience watching him be corrected by a gray square sergeant was a wound he could not bear. So he did the thing that finished him. He turned on Quill. "Do you know who I am?" His voice cracked up out of the cold register into something shrill. "I am the chief of protocol of a sovereign republic. I do not take instruction from a doorman. This man," the folio jabbed at me again, "is in my frame, and you will both stand aside or I will see you posted to a coal cellar by nightfall. Now move him." And he reached past Quill one more time to take my arm. Quill did not strike him. I want that recorded clearly, because in the days after there were people who wished he had, who wanted a story where the arrogant man got knocked into the cobbles, and that is not the story and it is not the house. Quill's hand closed on the man's wrist before it reached me, a single, controlled, professional movement, the kind of thing 31 years builds into a man's reflexes. And he held it, not twisting, not wrenching, simply holding, the way you would hold a door that someone was trying to open who had no business going through it. The chief of protocol pulled against him and could not free his arm, and his face, in front of 200 dignitaries and 100 cameras, did the thing his arrogance had been heading toward all morning. It came apart. "Sentry," Quill said, not looking away from the man, "you will hold your post." "Sergeant," I said. It was the first word I had spoken since coming on at 5. I did not move. "Mr. Hale," Quill said, and Sergeant Hale of the Palace Police was already there, because Quill had signaled him the moment the first hand landed, the small flat signal of the gate that the cameras never catch and the trained never miss. "This gentleman has assaulted a sentry of the house twice and a sergeant once before witnesses, and has refused lawful instruction to withdraw. Take him." And here is the thing that the chief of protocol, master of optics, never understood until it was far too late. There is no good frame of a powerful man being walked off a state carpet. He had spent the morning composing the perfect image, and now he became the subject of a worse one, and there was nothing in his 30 years of authority that could compose his way out of it. 2 palace police took him, 1 to each arm. Gently, correctly, with the particular careful courtesy the House uses on important persons precisely so that no one can ever say they were rough. And they turned him toward the side colonnade and the small plain door that leads out of every grand forecourt, the door the public never notices and important men never expect to use. He fought it the only way he had left, which was with his mouth. He invoked his title. He invoked his republic. He named loudly the consequences he would visit upon the house, the doorman, the sergeant, the soldier, the kingdom. He demanded the cameras be turned off, which is a thing only a man who has utterly lost the thread would demand. Because the cameras were his own, he had summoned them. He had spent the morning feeding them, and now they would not stop eating. And then, over the man's shoulder, as the police turned him toward the door, I saw the great south gates begin to part, and the first outriders of the ceremonial carriage came through into the forecourt, and I understood with a small cold drop in my stomach that the worst of it for him had not even begun. Because the head of state of the ceremonial republic, the very principal the chief of protocol had spent the morning serving, the man whose perfect arrival he had been arranging when he laid his hand on me, was about to step down from his carriage onto a red carpet, in front of his own delegation and 2 republics worth of press, and the first thing he was going to see was his own chief of protocol being walked toward a side door by 2 policemen, having just assaulted the host sentry on the host stone. I returned my eyes to the middle distance, and I held my post, and I waited to see what kind of man the principal would turn out to be. The carriage came up the carpet at a walk, the matched grays high-stepping, the silver-gray livery of the ceremonial outriders bright in the climbed sun. It drew to a halt with its door precisely opposite the foot of the south steps, opposite the arrival stone, opposite me, exactly where the protocol had measured it to stop, the one piece of the morning's choreography that had survived its own chief intact. A page sprang to the door. The step came down, and the head of state of the ceremonial republic stepped out onto the carpet into a forecourt that had just watched his most senior aide be arrested, and into a silence you could have held in your 2 hands. He was an older man, spare and upright, with close gray hair and a long, quiet face, and he wore the plain, dark morning dress of a man who did not need silver to tell you who he was. He stepped down, and he took in the forecourt in a single, unhurried sweep. The banners, the band frozen mid-tune, the dignitaries holding their breath, the 2 policemen halted halfway to the side door with his chief of protocol held between them, and the still soldier on the granite block with his uniform pulled crooked at the shoulder. I have stood through 40 arrivals, and I can read a man's first 3 seconds on the carpet better than I can read a printed page. In those 3 seconds, I watched the head of state understand exactly what had happened. I do not know how he knew. Perhaps a page had murmured it. Perhaps he had seen the last of it through the carriage glass. Perhaps a man who has governed for 20 years simply knows the shape of a subordinate's disgrace when he walks into it. But he knew. I saw it land in him, and I watched him decide in the space of 1 breath what kind of man he was going to be. He did not go to his chief of protocol. He did not ask what had happened, or demand the man's release, or invoke his own outrage, or do any of the dozen things a smaller principal would have done to protect his own people's face at the cost of his host's. He turned instead, and he looked at me. And then the head of state of the ceremonial republic walked off the measured center of the carpet, off the very sightline his chief of protocol had died to protect, and crossed to the arrival stone, and stopped in front of me, and he did a thing no visiting principal had done in the 240 years of that post. He inclined his head to me, not a nod, A bow small, exact, and unmistakable, the bow one disciplined man gives another. "Soldier," he said, in careful accented words pitched for me alone, though the whole silent forecourt heard every one of them. "A man of mine has insulted a man of yours on your own ground in my name. I am ashamed of it. I will not pretend it did not happen, and I will not ask your house to overlook it." He paused, and his quiet eyes went for a moment to my pulled shoulder seam and then back to my face. "You did not move. That was correct. You did the harder thing, and you did it perfectly. I came to be received by your house. I find I am received by you. Thank you. I will tell you what I did, because a man should account for himself honestly. I had spoken one word in 5 hours to my sergeant. I did not break that now. To answer a head of state in words, on the arrival stone in the middle of a ceremony, would have been to abandon the post in the very moment he was honoring me for holding it. So I did the only thing that was both an answer and a holding of the post at once. I brought my heels together, and I rendered him the full ceremonial salute of the house, the slow one, the deep one, the salute we give to a sovereign, and I held it, eyes forward, perfectly still. And I let the stillness say the thing my voice was not free to say, that he was received and received with honor, and that the man who had laid hands on me had no power to change that. The forecourt let out its held breath all at once. I heard it, 200 people exhaling together. And then, from somewhere up on the public gallery beyond the velvet ropes, a single pair of hands began to clap, and then 100, and then the whole gallery, and the band's conductor, who had been frozen with his baton half raised through the entire affair, brought it down at last, and the anthem of welcome rolled out across the stone exactly 9 minutes late and entirely perfect. The head of state straightened, and his quiet face allowed itself the smallest warming at the corners, and he turned to climb the south steps to where the Lord Chamberlain of our house waited to receive him. But he stopped on the second step and looked back, not at me this time, but past me, to the side colonnade where his chief of protocol still stood held between the 2 policemen. What passed over the principal's face then was not anger. It was something colder and more final than anger, the look of a man closing an account that has been open too long. He said 3 words to his own deputy, who had hurried down from the carriage, and the deputy went pale and nodded, and the principal climbed the rest of the steps and was received by our house with the full ceremony the morning had been built for, exactly as if nothing had happened, which is, in the end, the highest art of diplomacy, to let the ceremony close clean over the wound, so that the friendship between 2 peoples is not made to pay for the folly of one man. The chief of protocol was not released. I want to be clear about that, because there is a version of this story people expect, in which the powerful man is humiliated for a moment and then quietly let go with a warning, the way the powerful usually are. That is not what happened, and the reason it is not what happened is the most important thing I can tell you about that morning. It was not the house that pressed it. The house would have let him go. Our Lord Chamberlain, I learned later, had gone straight to the Serenine deputy in the first quiet minute and offered, with perfect courtesy, to treat the whole affair as a misunderstanding and release the man into the delegation's custody. The diplomatic thing, the smoothing over thing, the thing that keeps 2 republics' friendship out of the newspapers. It was the head of state of the Serenine Republic who refused that offer. His 3 words to his deputy on the steps had been, "He answers fully." He would not have his own man's assault on a host soldier smoothed away as a courtesy to himself. He held by his own choice, against his own immediate interest, before all the cameras his chief had summoned, that a man who lays hands on another nation's sentry in his sovereign's name must answer for it under that nation's law, plainly, with no diplomatic blanket thrown over it. He waived, in writing, before noon, every protection his delegation could have claimed for the man. He did it, his deputy told ours, because a republic that excuses its own arrogance abroad has begun to rot at home, and because the surest way to honor a host is to refuse to make the host carry your shame. So the chief of protocol no longer by sundown, was charged that afternoon, under the law of our kingdom, with assault upon a sentry of the house in the execution of his duty, a charge made the graver by its being committed before the assembled court at a state occasion. He had spent the morning fixing the optics with his hands. The optics he made with those hands were the only ones anyone would remember. I went off the gate at noon, relieved by a younger man named Foley who took the arrival stone with his eyes wide and his back very straight, having watched the whole morning from the lodge window and understanding, I think, for the first time, exactly what the post he was inheriting could ask of a man. I marched off the way you always march off, heel and toe, eyes forward, as if it had been any ordinary 5-hour stand and not the morning that would follow me the rest of my service. In the guardroom I unbuckled my chin strap and set down the rifle, and only then let my shoulder remember with a deep dull ache that a strong man had twice tried to tear it out of its socket. Quill came in behind me. He did not say anything ceremonious. He set a mug of tea down in front of me and he looked at my pulled tunic seam and he said, "Taylor'll have that right by the morning stand." And that was Quill's entire commendation, and it was worth more to me than any medal because I knew exactly what it meant. It meant, you held. It meant, nothing is broken that matters. The footage did the rest, and the footage is the part the public knows. I told you the irony at the start, and now you have watched it close. The chief of protocol had saturated that forecourt with lenses for one purpose, to capture the arrival of his principal, and every one of those lenses had instead captured him. There was no edit he could make, no frame he could crop, no story he could tell, because there were 100 angles and they all said the same thing. The long lens on the gallery had the look I gave him. The press pool had the first pull and the shove. A dozen phones over the velvet rope had the moment Quill took his wrist. And the frame that ran everywhere, the one that became a kind of small parable in two republics. Somebody had caught, in a single still, the head of state of the Serenine bowing to a soldier on a granite block, with the soldier's own chief of protocol blurred and small in the background, held between two policemen, walking toward a side door. He had wanted the arrival shot. He got one. It just was not the one he had arranged. There were people in the days after who tried to make me into something I am not. The clip of the 1-second look went out and came back amplified, the way such things do now, and for a few days strangers said my name who had no business knowing it and called me unbreakable and a wall of iron and other words that sound fine and mean very little. I want to set that down plainly because the post deserves better than a legend. I am not unbreakable. I am a man who has spent 11 years learning, one cold dawn at a time, to put everything I feel into the single discipline of not moving, and who happened to be standing on the arrival stone on the morning a foolish man decided to test it. Any of 100 men of the house would have done exactly the same, and most of them would tell you, as I am telling you, that the stillness is not the absence of the storm. The stillness is the storm held. The trial, when it came that autumn, was a brief and tidy thing. The evidence was the evidence. There was nothing to argue. The man's own counsel did not contest that he had laid hands on me twice and shoved me once and laid hands on the sergeant. How could he, with 100 cameras agreeing? His defense was the only one left to a man like that, and it was the saddest thing I heard in the whole affair. He pleaded through his counsel that he had not understood that I was a real soldier, that he had taken the ceremonial post for a piece of the staging, a costumed figure placed for effect, no different from a stanchion or a banner. He had not, he wanted the court to know, believed he was assaulting a man at all. He had believed he was adjusting a prop. I was called to give my account, and I gave it the way the house had taught me, in few plain words, eyes level, taking neither pleasure nor heat from any of it. The counsel asked me, with a careful edge, whether it was not in fact the case that the ceremonial guard is precisely a piece of staging, a symbol, a decoration, a fixed and pretty fixture of a state occasion, and whether a man might be forgiven, in the rush of a great morning, for treating such a fixture as a thing to be arranged. I thought about that question longer than I thought about any other, because in a way it was the only real question of the whole trial, and the man's whole folly had grown out of getting it wrong. "A fixture does not choose to stand," I said at last. "I do. Every morning in the dark I choose it. The post is not staging. The post is a promise that whoever arrives at the house of Caldrith will be received by men who do not move, because the house does not move, because the things the house stands for do not move." He did not lay his hands on a prop. He laid his hands on the promise. The promise held. That was the most I had said aloud since coming on the gate that morning months before, and I did not say anything else, and the court did not need me to. He was convicted and sentenced, and the sentence is on the record, and I will not dwell on it, because the punishment was never the point and the law can speak for itself. He returned to his republic a private citizen with no protocol and no folio and no frame to arrange, and I am told he is rarely spoken of there, and that when he is, it is as a cautionary thing. The man who tried to fix the optics with his hands and made the worst picture of his life. I went back on the gate the Monday after the trial, to the arrival stone in the gray before dawn, while the carpet was being unrolled for some lesser occasion and the dew was still on the cobbles. Foley relieved me at noon, as he often does now. He has the makings of a fine man for the post, and I have caught myself watching him the way Quill once watched me. The world had moved on the way it does. There were new arrivals, new banners, new principles, new mornings. The Serenine State visit closed clean over its one wound, exactly as the two old men at the top of it had meant it to. And the friendship between the kingdom and the republic is, I am told, warmer now than it was before, because nothing builds trust between two peoples like watching each of them, on a hard morning, choose honor over face. I think sometimes about the difference between the two men who came across that carpet to me. One came in a beautiful gray coat with a silver lanyard and a folio full of arrangements, certain that the world was his to compose, and he reached out to move a man with his hands and lost everything he had. The other came in plain dark dress with 20 years of governing behind him, and he walked off his own sightline to bow to a soldier, and gained, in that one small bow, more honor than all the optics in the world could have bought him. The first man believed the picture was the thing. The second man understood that the thing is the thing, the held post, the kept promise, the choice made in the dark, and that the picture, if you tend the thing and let the picture alone, will take care of itself. I am still on the gate. I will be as long as the house will have me. Most mornings nothing happens at all. That is what the post mostly is, and I would not have it otherwise. But every now and then a man comes across the carpet who has decided the world is his to rearrange, and reaches out a hand and finds, to his great surprise, that there are still some things a hand cannot move. I am one of them. I do not move. That is the whole of it, and it is enough.